storm of controversy with his comments over the weekend on child poverty. Many people have called him cold and callous. Moore was asked on a radio station about children going to school hungry. Here's what he had to say.
Well, obviously, nobody wants kids to go to school hungry, but yeah, certainly we want to make sure that kids go to school full belly. But is that always the government's job, to be there to serve people their breakfast? You know, empowering families with more power and resources so that they can feed their own children is, I think, a good thing. It's the government's just my job to feed my neighbor's child. I don't think so.
All right. After those comments, he initially, James Moore, said they're taken out of context, and then Moore finally apologized today, saying he sincerely regrets his words and he believes all levels of government and citizens have a responsibility to be compassionate and in care of those in need. He sent out a tweet about this and a mass statement. We also contacted James Moore at Power and Politics. Here's what he told us. He said, quote, "I'm genuinely regretful about what I said. It takes away the good work to alleviate poverty. I'm disappointed in myself for having said that because I know there is a role for Ottawa given the number of social housing and homeless initiatives I've fought for in my own community." He also said, "I'm sorry," in a tweet. So he has apologized for it, but is that enough? Who is responsible for ensuring young kids are properly fed before they start their day? There's a lot of kids in poverty in this country. Why are so many children here in Canada going hungry, and should the federal government be doing more? Joining me now to discuss this, in Halifax, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Employment, Scott Armstrong. In Vancouver, Jinny Sims of the NDP, the Employment and Social Development critic, and in Montreal, Liberal Foreign Affairs critic, Mark Garneau. Let me start with the opposition, and we'll get to Mr. Armstrong in a second. Jinny Sims, you have released a statement about what Mr. Moore said. Minister Moore has apologized. What do you make of the reaction?
Well, I'm glad he's apologized, though I'm concerned about how long it took him to apologize. But when you look at it, what Mr. Moore expressed, even though it was very hurtful and shocking and very blatant, it actually displays where this government is at and where this government's policies are. Because when you look at it, what we have seen over the last number of years, remember it was 1989 when NDP Ed Broadbent brought forward a motion to eradicate child poverty, and that was unanimously supported in the House. 2009, we had another motion to eradicate poverty for children, and yet child poverty has increased. For example, across Canada, there are 1 in 7 children lives in poverty, and in my beautiful province of British Columbia, we have 1 in 5. And I think for any level of government to say they have not played a role in increasing that poverty is just a little bit disingenuous. And it takes a village to raise a child, and it's government policy and government social policy and economic policy that actually has increased the disparity between the rich and poor, the have and the have-nots in this country.
All right, Mark Garneau, Minister Moore made the comments, then he apologized today for the comments, retracting them, saying he regrets them. What do you make of this situation? Do the comments reflect anything but someone misspeaking? And should the federal government do more to alleviate child poverty?
I'm glad he apologized. The comment was incredibly insensitive, but it was also very revealing because I think that it showed Canadians the true face of the Harper government. I believe this is a government that somehow believes that you know, if you're poor, it's partly your fault, and doesn't have that sense of realizing that there are people in this country who are poor through no fault of their own. I'm glad that he apologized, but it would be nice to see some follow-on action because...
well, what action?
You know, well, if we've looked at homelessness and social housing as major issues where there is a strong federal component, this government has not stepped up to the plate on those. It's basically on the social housing tried to push it to the provinces, and on the homelessness, it has taken an approach where it makes decisions for short periods of time at the last minute, not realizing that homelessness is actually increasing in this country. That affects a lot of children as well.
Mr. Armstrong, what's your take? First of all, your reaction first to Minister Moore's initial remarks. What do you make of those?
Well, I don't think his initial remarks were reflective of the position of the government. It's definitely not reflective of the position of our caucus. And I think the minister has apologized. I think we should move on from that. I don't think those remarks were really reflective of the heart of James Moore. And we know that Minister Moore is relatively newlywed. He's got a young family himself. He understands the fact that we need to do what we can to alleviate child poverty. And it's the responsibility of all levels of government. In fact, it's the responsibility of everyone in society to try to support those who are struggling in society. And I think that's more reflective of what Minister Moore really feels and what this government really feels.
The House of Commons unanimously passed this resolution, as Jinny Sims said, in 1989, vowing to end child poverty by the year 2000. In 2009, there was a resolution to immediately develop a plan to combat the issue. Mr. Armstrong, is the government doing enough to end child poverty?
Well, if you look at actually the figures, I dispute what Ms. Sims said. There's 225 less children in poverty today than we took office in 2006. And we take a strong step. 1,000 less children in poverty today than when we took office in 2006. We have made significant investments to support families. For example, the universal child care benefit, that supports over 2 million Canadian children every year. That's lifted 41,000 children out of poverty. The average family of four today in Canada pays $3,200 less a year in federal tax than it did when we took office. We're making some strong investments in not only in the area of taxes, but we are actually supporting housing first programs so that people actually have a home. We're supporting social housing through CMHC. Our government takes this issue seriously. We understand really, but in the end, Evan, let me just finish. In the end, we know that the best answer to poverty is a job and having a good, strong, stable employment. The focus of this government is employment. The focus of the government is the economy.
Can I just read you something?
We believe that
is
the best answer to poverty.
Library of Parliament research published in 2009. I'm going to read it to you. The persistently high rate of child poverty, despite economic growth, suggests that while good labor market conditions do ease poverty, employment is not always a sure route out of child poverty. In fact, in 2005, 41% of the children living in poverty lived with at least one parent who worked full-time all year. So are other measures necessary?
Well, absolutely. All levels of government have to take steps to try to support those in need. And that's why our government is looking at several areas, including housing, including the tax policy we have, where we're reducing taxes, and a focus on employment, because we know that if a family does have a stable home and a stable job, they're far less likely to be in poverty. We need to focus on that. We also need to focus on education and skills training. And that's something that's going to be a strong core of what this government does over the next several years, trying to provide the skills for the jobs that are there for Canadians.
I got a minute here. Jinny Sims and Mark Garner, your response to that. Is the government doing enough?
They are not doing enough. They've got no set targets, and I've seen no concrete action since I've been sitting as a parliamentarian. And let me tell you that this is the government of Stephen Harper, who said when the Ed Broadbent motion was passed to eradicate child poverty, that was the high watermark of act of stupidity by politicians in Canada. And that's the government we're talking about. So do I have faith that this government is committed to eradication of poverty? Absolutely not, because in BC, 1 in 5 children live in poverty, and that is an incredibly high number. And it's time for real action, and stop talking about it. Let's set those targets, and let's get on with it.
Mr. Garneau?
Yeah, in the case of Aboriginals, it's 1 in 4 below the poverty line. Let's get back to the thing that Mr. Moore said. It was about children not having breakfast before they go to school. You know, you can get a job if you're educated, but if you're not even educated, because when you go to school in the morning, you haven't had a meal, you can't concentrate, that is something that should concern us at the federal level, and we should be doing something about it.
All right, I got to leave it there. We have a special coming up, so I want to come back to a very critical issue in the country over the days and weeks to come. Scott Armstrong, Jinny Sims, and Mark Garneau, I appreciate your time today, all of you.
Thank you, Evan.
We got lots more on the story.